A lot of people don't like Abu. Abu has been consistent with these pews. He went and got in touch with that man, and this is how it goes. Give Pastor Kelly that work. Pastor Kelly, he might have picked the finesse and tried to back out. I don't support Berean, but boy, them pews that we talked about, we're gonna keep talking about it. And we're gonna bring that European professor on. We're gonna have to do this stuff because this is a place of dialogue. This is a place of dialogue, and the dialogue is going to take place. People could be offended.
In this video, I'd like to discuss the emphasis many have been putting on appealing to scholars in the ongoing discussions about the markings on the pews at First African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia. And if I can be frank for a moment, it seems clear that some are hoping to find a scholarly endorsement which can somehow justify ending all discussion and debate on the markings. And honestly, a significant portion of those persons seem to have never wanted discussion on the markings to have ever taken place at all. So this video will have 3 sections. The first section will be about the latest developments in the ongoing controversy over Professor David Muniz, who's a professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. The second section will be on the mysterious Richard Katz, apparently believed by some to be a professor of Hebrew linguistics at Tel Aviv University. The third and final section will touch on the thoughts of a few other scholars. So let us begin with the first scholar, Professor David Muniz. For those who don't know, back on the 22nd of November, there was a panel discussion on the Boom Church Atlanta account, in which it was declared that the debate over the markings on the pews was now over, because a scholar of Solitreo, David Muniz, had confirmed that a complex Hebrew sentence in the Solitreo script appeared on one of the pews. When others emailed Professor Muniz, however, it turned out that the Boom Church panel discussion had badly misrepresented his actual positions. He did not think that any Solitreo appeared on the pews, and he could not discern any coherent sentence therein. Since that time, 2 members of that panel discussion, William Brown and Kelly Richardson, have been offering up speculations that Professor Muniz was actually bullied and threatened into changing his position. And the followers or supporters or fans of Brown and Richardson have been repeating those claims in various comments around social media. To illustrate this, permit me to show a few clips in which these claims are made and also put on the screen a couple of comments from their supporters.
Exactly. And then, they don't want to talk about how they bullied the professor. They don't want to talk about how they bullied the professor. So they bullied the professor by bringing to him Black Hebrew Israelites or moderate Hebrew Israelites. And
so these are some of the things that I think that was bombarding his email. And he's like, I don't want to, and ain't no telling. People could have been emailing him, threatening his job, or, emailing his administrative, the school or whatever it is to cause like, listen, I'm not getting
because what they think that they're getting away with, like bullying Professor David Muniz, guess what? They're not going to get away with it. And that's not a threat. That is a promise. Yeah. They are not going to get away with it.
People could have been emailing him, threatening his job, or, emailing his administrative, the school or whatever it is.
What they think that they're getting away with, like bullying Professor David Muniz, guess what? They're not going to get away with it. And that's not a threat. That is a promise.
Back on December 7th, in an attempt to illustrate this alleged bullying that supposedly caused David Muniz's alleged shift in position, Kelly Richardson showed an email from a person who had reached out to Muniz for clarification and had mentioned Hebrew Israelites in his email. From there, Richardson has leapt to the conclusion that myself and others were involved in a campaign to turn Muniz away from his original position, in part by bringing Hebrew Israelites up. The reality, however, is that I do not know the man who wrote that email, which Richardson considered so outrageous and so egregious. Now, I have no connection to him, but I'm not saying that to cast aspersions on the man. Rather, I'm simply clarifying the fact of the matter. I'll put here on the screen the email that I wrote to Professor Muniz. Those who are interested can pause the video and read it at their leisure, though perhaps that might be easier on a laptop or desktop than on a mobile device. But the salient point to be gleaned from the email that I sent him is that I never mentioned Hebrew Israelites in my email, as I see that as irrelevant to the topic. In fact, I'm the one who has a video arguing that all this stuff about who is or is not an Israelite is irrelevant to the discussion on whether discernible language appears on the pews. And so too, when I appeared on Berean TV back on November 15th, I repeatedly argued that we need to separate out the lineage claims from the language questions.
Well, one thing I would say is that I've been on this subject for about a year now, and I've always preferred that questions of lineage be separated from questions of language, especially when discussing them with Israelites, because they become so contentious and so imbued with emotion that it winds up locking up the discussion. So, for example, even fairly recently, when you had both Pastor Kelly Richardson and Vocab Malone on, Vocab offered to discuss the pews with Kelly Richardson, and Kelly Richardson interpreted it as an attack on his identity claim. And Vocab held up that paper sign that said it's about language, not lineage. What Vocab was trying to convey, and I agree with him here, is that we should separate the question of language and lineage. And the way I would put it is this. I don't claim to speak on anyone's lineage across millennia, but if, hypothetically speaking, I concluded that Pastor Kelly Richardson was an Israelite, or that people who built that church were Israelites, that still would not convince me that there is Hebrew on those pews. Those are two very different subjects, lineage and language.
Like you said earlier, emotions run high when we're dealing with this.
Yes, which is why I would prefer that we separate out the lineage claims from the language claims, because I honestly believe that even if, hypothetically speaking, we accepted the lineage claims, they're not going to change our positions on the language. A person can believe whatever they want to believe about the lineages of people and still hold that, for example, that Hebrew doesn't appear on those pews. I think they're two very different questions, and that's why I feel they should be put aside. And also, I want to reiterate that I don't think we should be impugning anyone's motivations. It's unhelpful to accuse people of having dark motives. It would be better just to look at the markings on the pews and examine them.
I have to agree with that 100%. Great.
But I think that we should focus on arguments, not persons. And so, and that's why I said, if anyone wants to make a case, I invite them to make the case. I'm interested in seeing their methodology. I'm interested in seeing their argument, but I want them to look at the markings themselves. Let's focus on the markings and forget about all this talk about lineage or motivations or who you hang out with, etc.
Okay.
So my point is that I had absolutely nothing to do with bringing up Israelites in emails to David Bunis. These accusations that Brown, Richardson, and their fans have been launching at me are baseless and false. Ironically, however, in the email that Kelly Richardson showed, the author actually alluded to what inspired him to bring up Israelites in his message to Bunis, and that was some of his own former students who have Israelite leanings. So it would seem that his email and his reference to Israelites was inspired by young people who were moved by that aforementioned Boom Church panel discussion. I'm going to play the relevant portion where Kelly Richardson reads the gentleman's email, but permit me to first note the date of the email, December 3rd. Let's keep that date in mind, as that date is going to be relevant in a moment. But focusing on his portion of his emails, which mentioned, Israelites, let's focus on that right now. So here, listen to this.
It says, "Good evening, Dr. Bunis. I am Joseph Patterson, and I am an educator at a local high school in Virginia. And I have a few of my former students who identify with such groups as the moderate Hebrew Israelites, who has used your name and credentials to deduce that."
So think about this. Kelly Richardson is mad that this man brought up Israelites in his email to Bunis. But he did so because some of his own former students were influenced by attempts to mix the Pews discussion with claims of Israelite ancestry. I didn't convince those kids to conflate those two things, nor did the man who wrote that email. It is men like Kelly Richardson who have spent literally years intertwining the Israelite question with the question of whether Hebrew appears on the pews. So if anything, men like Kelly Richardson are more likely to bear responsibility for the chain of events leading up to that email, because they were the ones mixing the Israelite issue into the Pews discussion, despite myself and others encouraging them to keep those two subjects separate. But honestly, this whole controversy over that email is a distraction. While they try to serve that up as the explanation for this alleged shift on Bunis's part, this is where the date of that email becomes relevant. Remember, it was sent on December 3rd, but David Bunis told Professor Brown that he did not believe Solitreo appeared on the pews in the previous month, which is to say back in November. So that email is not responsible for Bunis taking a position contrary to that of Richardson, Brown, and others. The reason why I call this controversy over the email a distraction is because it seems to be part of a clear attempt, a conscious attempt, to draw attention away from the fact that Brown had badly misrepresented Bunis in that panel discussion back in November. So with that in mind, let's recall what Brown said that day and the day that followed. As you watch these clips, note how Brown declares that Bunis confirmed Benaiah Israel's proposal for a specific sentence on the pew in the Solitreo script. Note how Brown gives a translation of the alleged Hebrew sentence found on the pew, and note how he says Bunis backs that sentence. And as you watch him say all that, keep in mind that all of those claims were false.
He actually confirmed that what you're saying and how you translated it was actually correct in how you translated it. So not only did it confirm what it sees, what it says here in, take or grasp the way of the Lord or God, he confirms the way you laid it out. And so not only did you bring out, but he also it showed there was some other aspects within the pews that we didn't know. So not only does it says take a grasp of God, but it said take a grasp of Yah or God Israel with a bass voice, as you put it, or with a loud voice, meaning praise him loudly. That's what this means. So Abu asked, can we find a coherent sentence? Well, yeah, we just did. And not only that, we got a scholar to back it. So we know what the actual language is. We know what's on the pews. We know what the specific pew says.
Moreover, the day after that panel discussion, the Boom Church's Facebook page declared that they know it is Solitreo on the pews. And they declared that they have the official stamp of the scholar, David Bunis. They've since taken down this Facebook post, but it's important to remember what they were claiming before Bunis's actual position became public knowledge. So this raises some questions. With their original claims in mind, do they mean to imply that Bunis once did endorse a complex sentence in the Solitreo script, only to later walk that back after others emailed him? If so, why don't they show the emails from before the alleged shift, which have that alleged endorsement? Of course, the reality is that no such endorsement exists or ever existed, and no amount of feigning outrage over emails mentioning Israelites will change that fact. As I close this first section, I want to recall that before Bunis's actual position became public, there were people who wanted to treat the position of Brown, or the position that Brown attributed to Bunis, as part of as a sort of de facto dogma. And the basic argument was that the expert has spoken, so now mere students cannot say anything different.
So what about that, what is it, Solitreo? So in the pews, I mean, we have a response from a professional, but my understanding is they're going to try to blow shots at that. It's obvious you can look at the Solitreo writings, and it looks like what's on the pews.
They can't blow shots at that. We have Abu saying that he's not an expert. He's still a student. So, I mean, if he's still a student, what's he going to say against somebody that's an expert? Nothing. His conversation is null and void at that point, all of them.
However, now that it is clear that Bunis does not agree with them, people who were previously declaring that Bunis's position ended the discussion are now declaring that they're free to reach conclusions different from that of Bunis. Consider this clip where Kelly Richardson, who presumably would likewise concede that he's not an expert, admits that David Bunis does not support his position, yet he still feels he can interpret Bunis's work in favor of that position. This would mean that a mere student actually can still speak on the matter even after a scholar has spoken, and a student is free to disagree with that scholar. That's a pretty obvious and noteworthy shift in their own attitude towards these appeals to scholars.
I want to make this clear. Professor David Bunis does not support nor endorse what I am going to share with you. However, his work does. I'm going to use his presentation and guide on Solitreo to show his teachings support my conclusion.
And now we move to the second section of this video, where we discuss the second scholar that they have publicly trotted out as endorsing their position. This second scholar is apparently named Richard Katz, And as I said earlier, some are under the impression that he's a professor of Hebrew linguistics at Tel Aviv University. And I want to say that I want to dedicate this second section of the video to Faithful to God, and I'll explain why in a moment. Back on December 7th, Kelly Richardson showed a number of emails from a correspondence between William Brown of the Boom Church and this scholar named Richard Katz. And when I first saw it, I didn't feel there was much to say, as they never showed the precise markings where the scholar allegedly found, certain Hebrew terms. So I simply hoped they would show those precise markings at a later time, and then I could offer a meaningful comment then. But a number of people found the section with Katz significant. Many of the fans and supporters of Brown and Richardson felt the scholar's endorsement ended the debate, similar to how they felt about Bunis in the past. So too, some on my side felt the appeal to Katz had to be explored and addressed. So let me show you the portions of Richardson's video where Brown reads the emails he received from Professor Katz. I'll even include the humorous clips from the 1960s Batman television series, which Richardson interspersed, apparently to convey that these emails are delivering knockout blows. So this section will run for about 3.5 minutes. Here we go.
The great thing about Richard Katz is not only that he's sharp in the area of cursive Hebrew and as a philographer, but he has some understanding of the Soletreo script. So here's the first email that we got back. His response: thanks for emailing me, William. Looking at this pew, because I sent him one, I can definitively say that it's not Arabic. It's not Arabic. But more closely to ancient Aramaic square letters. But could possibly be a form of Hebrew. Why? Because if you know the relation between Aramaic and Hebrew, you can see why he came to this conclusion. If you could email me more pictures of the pews, if you have them in a higher resolution, and I can give you a more definitive answer. Shalom. Thanks for these photos, William. I must say, looking at these photos, the old cursive handwriting of Judeo-Spanish language seems quite clear. Quite clear. Also, there are other characters on the pews, because I sent him more than one pew. Remember, in the first email, I sent him one pew. The second one, I sent him more than one pew. There are other characters on the pews of cursive Hebrew used in Israel today. By the look of the writings, the pews could not have been written by the same person. That's possibly why Soletreo and Hebrew block letters, or some could interpret them as cursive, appear on them. The bottom left corner, here it is, listen to what it says, the bottom left corner, I would say, are Hebrew cursive letters. Hebrew cursive letters. In the traditional Bet Yod Nun Sofit, which would be the word ben, B-E-N, or Hebrew for son of. I hope this helped you on your quest. I'm interested in how the markings were written, especially since it's not a synagogue. Professor Richard Katz, Hebrew Linguistic Studies, Tel Aviv, Israel. It says, good morning, William. Regarding your last question, as I've stated, Bet Yod Nun Sofit can be seen using Hebrew square letters, and after reviewing what Beneda presented using Soletreo, those markings are extremely close. And one could conclude the words he translated from those markings are strikingly close in comparison. My conclusion regarding the pews, the words B'nai Yisrael, or son of Yisrael, or simply Yisrael, should be noted. From what I see after examining what you sent. Professor Richard Katz, Hebrew Linguistic Studies, Tel Aviv, Israel.
Now, I'll explain why I wanted to dedicate this second section of the video to Faithful to God. About a week ago, Faithful made a suggestion which initially struck me as crazy, and at the time he suggested it, I flatly told him that I found it too far-fetched to take seriously. In short, I rejected his suggestion out of hand. So what was Faithful's crazy idea? Well, he asked me this question: what if the scholar Richard Katz doesn't actually exist? Is it possible that William Brown himself composed those emails, and which he attributed to a fictional professor of Hebrew linguistics at Tel Aviv University? At the time, I immediately told him that of course not. Of course that's not the case. They would never do that. You know, it seemed like a ridiculous assertion. However, over time, my receptiveness to the idea has evolved. And so in this section, I'd like to slowly go over the steps via which both our thoughts on this topic has evolved. At first, the things being pointed out will seem minor, but the case begins to build and mount as we go along. The first thing that gave me a bit of pause was when Faithful told me that he went looking for information about Katz online and could not find any trace of this purported professor of Hebrew linguistics, apparently from Tel Aviv, from the University of Tel Aviv. So I myself gave it a shot, and I too was unable to find anything about him online. Now, that didn't convince me that Katz necessarily didn't exist, but at the time I did find it rather strange, as serious academics, especially professors at universities, are usually very easy to find online. And then I noticed that Brown himself had recently seemed to show awareness of the fact that it's difficult to find Katz. And I found that curious as well. It almost seemed like a bit of a taunt.
We're not going to give you the opportunity to bombard. We're not going to give you free information. You want to find out who Professor Katz is, and you yourself going to do the due diligence of tracking him down and getting his information yourself. We're not going to give it to you.
So this inspired me to start taking a closer look at the emails which Kelly Richardson had showed from Brown's correspondence with Katz, both the excerpts that he put in the foreground and the screenshots he used as background. Richardson's video showed 5 emails, the first being Brown's initial email to Katz from December 3rd at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I want to note the dates and times as they are going to be relevant. And by the way, it was on the morning of December 3rd that the first video showing how Bunis was misrepresented came out. It was later that afternoon that Brown wrote his first email to Katz, almost as a reaction to the video that had come out about Bunis. But remember the time of that first email, 1:30 p.m. Then they showed Katz's reply from the same day at 2:08 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So Katz's reply to Brown came 38 minutes after Brown sent his email. This is going to be relevant later. Brown wrote to Katz, and Katz replied 38 minutes later. Keep that in mind. Then they showed Brown's response to Katz's reply at 2:29 p.m. Eastern. Then they showed Katz's second reply at 3:12 p.m. Eastern. And then the fifth and final email they showed was another reply from Katz the next morning, December 4th, at 7:53 a.m. Eastern. As we looked closely at those emails, we noticed similarities in writing style. In my experience, what is typical in academic circles is you open an email with your greeting or salutation, and then separate that from the body of the email which follows with a line break, which is to say, moving the text that's to follow down a couple of lines by hitting your enter key a couple of times, or at least separate it with some sort of punctuation. Now, Brown will at times write emails and even social media posts which begin with a greeting and then launch right into text without starting a new line or even employing any sort of punctuation, like a period or at least a comma. And I found it interesting that the same style surfaces in a couple of Katz's emails as well, a style which, in my experience, is uncommon in academic circles. For example, on your screen, you see Brown's email from 2:29 p.m. At the bottom, which begins, quote, "Thanks for your response, Professor. I've attached a picture," end quote, etc. Notice how there is no line break or even punctuation between that opening thanks and the self-reference which follows. And Katz's reply is above. From 43 minutes later, he opens with the same style. Quote, "Thanks for these photos, Williams. I must say," end quote, etc. Again, there is no line break or even punctuation separating that opening thanks and the self-reference which follows. So too, when we compare Brown's initial email from December 3rd at 1:30 p.m. to the last email from Katz, which was shown on the email from December 4th at 7:53 a.m., Brown opens with his greeting and then begins a new sentence, "My name is William Brown," on the same line, starting with a lowercase letter and no punctuation separating that new sentence from the greeting which preceded it. So too, Katz's reply opens, quote, "Good morning, William, regarding your last question," end quote, etc. There's no line break or even punctuation after the greeting, and what would presumably be a new sentence, yet again, starts with a lowercase letter. Now, at this point, one might say this is simply a function of both participants in the correspondence rushing their emails. And, I would at least agree that the similar writing styles and similar approaches to punctuation between Katz and Brown by themselves would not make for a conclusive case in favor of Faithful's aforementioned suggestion. But at this point, I was starting to feel as though the curious coincidences, the curiosities, were starting to pile up a bit. Then I took another look at this YouTube community post, which Brown had put up on December 3rd, after the first video, publicizing Boonis's actual position had come out. In that post, in that YouTube community post, Brown shared a screenshot of Katz's first reply to him. I noticed the 38M in the top right corner, meaning that at the time Brown took the screenshot, his initial email was 38 minutes old. Remember that Brown sent his first email to Katz at 1:30 p.m. Eastern, and Katz's reply came back at 2:08 p.m. Eastern. For Brown's initial email to be 38 minutes old when he took this screenshot, it means that Brown had opened Katz's reply, read it, and took a screenshot all within a minute of it hitting his inbox, which is to say basically within seconds. Now, I admit that's possible. One could say that perhaps he had his phone in his hand when he received the email and the notification immediately drew his attention to it, and within mere seconds he saw the gravity of the reply and felt it was important to take a screenshot. That's possible, but how likely is it? At the very least, this is another one of those curious coincidences. This is another one of these curiosities that's piling up. And we had noticed before that while they did not share Katz's full mail address, his full email address, what they did show revealed that the portion before the arroba or the at symbol was not some permutation of his name, as is typically the case with academics' emails, the emails of professors. Rather, it was the phrase Hebrew language. And whatever the domain was, it was a .com, not a .edu. Now, admittedly, there's nothing impossible about that. An academic can have a private email separate from the one his university provides him with, but it is at least a bit curious. In a vacuum, it's nothing, but against the backdrop of the various other curiosities, it becomes a bit more interesting. Now, if I can segue for a moment, I want to note that in his coverage of the controversy over the email sent to Boonis, Kelly Richardson declared on more than one occasion that Boonis, in his reply to the relevant author whom Richardson had focused on, that Boonis had also BCC'd or blind copied me. Now, that's not quite accurate. He did not blind copy or BCC me, rather he copied or CC'd me. And so, too, he copied William Brown. The reason why I went on this segue now is because when Brown replied to all, he copied me as well, which would have been impossible were I blind copied. As a result, I received an email from Brown. And what I received was his reply to Boonis and the man who had mentioned his students with Israelite leanings. With that in mind, we decided to run an experiment. While we didn't know Katz's email address, we guessed that if it was, actually Brown writing these emails, then it might be a hastily thrown together email address. And working with that hypothesis, we thought that as Brown uses Yahoo for his own main email account, he might have likewise created a Yahoo account for his Katz persona, if that is, he was the author of Katz's emails. So I sent an email to HebrewLanguage@yahoo.com. Now, and immediately after that, I posted an admittedly cheeky Facebook post showing a screenshot of the email I sent, which included a garbage or non-existent email address, which I blind copied, and I'll share a link to that Facebook post in the video description. Now, the point was to convey and record that we were anticipating that a reply from Katz might show features similar to the email I received from Brown. But so too, another point of BCCing the garbage or non-existent email address was that I should immediately get a bounced back error message saying that email did not exist. But if we did get that, yet we didn't get a corresponding bounce back, error message for the Yahoo account, we would know that a Hebrew language at yahoo.com email address did in fact exist. Sure enough, what we, sent the BCC to got a bounce back, but the Yahoo account did not. So we knew that the Yahoo account did exist. Hebrew language at yahoo.com was a real email address. That said, here's the email that I sent to that Yahoo account. Quote, "Greetings. Are you Richard Katz? I recently saw a video about a professor named Richard Katz who had analyzed some pictures of markings on church pews from Georgia and concluded that discernible Hebrew was found therein. If that was you, might I ask some questions about that? Sincerely, AA." End quote. And then there's a footnote at the end linking to the relevant video showing the email. Much to our glee, we received a reply from that email address. However, before I read that email, I want to return briefly to this previously mentioned YouTube community post from Brown. I want to look at this YouTube community post just so you can get a bit more of a sense of Brown's writing style and to take that with you into the look at the reply we received from Richard Katz. So starting with the second sentence at the end of the first line, the YouTube community post reads as follows, quote, "See, for us, this has always been about our family and the church history, and this isn't a debate. For us, this is about bringing a resolution to all who need it." End quote. Notice the portion which reads, "For us, this is about bringing a resolution," end quote, that portion is presumably a new thought. It could have been its own sentence. At the very least, it should have been preceded by some sort of punctuation. Now, as a disclaimer, this is not intended to disparage Brown's writing style, but rather only to give you a sense of how he writes. Aside from that, listen to this next sentence, which starts in the middle of the fifth line of this YouTube community post. Quote, "See, the first presentation was only to set up the second once. You see the hand of those who oppose, and now that they've shown their hand, the proof is on them to prove this linguistic scholar wrong who definitive said it's not Arabic." End quote. It's a bit of a, how can I put this? It's a long sentence. It's somewhat of a cumbersome sentence. It's the most polite way I can put it. And keep that style of writing in mind, as now I'm going to read the email from Katz. I'll intersperse a few comments along the way. The email begins as follows, quote, "Thank you for emailing me. I'm Professor Katz, and I'm fully aware and very familiar with the video link you've attached concerning First African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia, as well as other videos recording the subject. I've received several emails. Many were upset regarding my conclusion and findings of a discernible language on the pews in Georgia." End quote. Now, let me stop here for a moment. Notice the line which reads, quote, "I've received several emails," and the line, quote, "Many were upset regarding my conclusion." Notice that those two lines are presumably two separate thoughts, yet there is no punctuation separating them. This is a feature of Brown's writing. Also, as we go through this, note how this email conveniently hits every point which Brown would want a scholar in his favor to hit. So with that in mind, returning to the text of the email, I'll start again with that last sentence, which I had read in part. Quote, "I've received several emails. Many were upset regarding my conclusion and findings of a discernible language on the pews in Georgia. Not to say that that's your position, but I feel it's best to share with you, like I shared with others regarding my conclusion, and also due to my schedule and projects I'm involved in, I don't have the free time in my schedule to go into full details regarding the breakdown and process." End quote. Note that that's a single sentence, and it is somewhat reminiscent of that last sentence I just read from the YouTube community post. Aside from that, conveniently, the professor preemptively informs me that he's too busy to get into the details of his findings. So, pointing to the precise markings where the relevant Hebrew terms are found might not be possible at this time. That's, it's sort of a device to rule out showing where the alleged Hebrew terms appear. Now, there are only two sentences left in the body of the email. The first sentence is short, while the second sentence meanders in a way which is indicative of Brown's writing style. Here, listen to this. Quote, "Let me start by saying this, and I hope this answers your questions, period. William Brown didn't misrepresent or misquote my findings of a discernible language on the pews. In fact, upon his request, I gave him permission to share my conclusion regarding the pews. My field of study and expertise brought me to the conclusion that solitreo and Hebrew block letters are on the pews based upon several high-resolution images of the pews that were sent to me by William Brown, period. Best wishes, Richard Katz, PhD, end quote. Did you notice that he capitalized the H in PhD? Honestly, I think it's highly unlikely that any scholar who has actually earned a doctorate in philosophy would capitalize the H in PhD. Rather, they'd leave it lowercase. However, you know who does write PhD that way? William Brown, and we actually have examples of that. Let's turn to that infamous Boom Church panel discussion, which took place back on the 22nd of November. And I'm going to pick it up at about the 1 hour, 7 minute mark, in a portion where he says he reached out to a student at Tel Aviv University to ask them to reach out to one of their professors for help in deciphering the pews. Here, take a look at this.
So I just reached out to a brother that I know who's a student at Tel Aviv University because I knew that we needed to get this. So I inboxed him on Facebook. I blurred his name because of the fact that I don't want people harassing him. Plus, he's involved in politics in Israel. So I asked him, I say, listen, do you know anybody at the school or whatnot that can, decipher this, look at it or whatnot? And, he responded back to me. He was going to send it over to one of his, professors and try to find someone.
Honestly, I must confess, I'm even wondering about the identity of that alleged student as well. But that's a discussion for another time. The relevant point is the text in blue, the blue block of text on the left is the message that William Brown sent to that alleged student. And I'd like to zoom in and focus on the way that he spelled PhD, in which he clearly capitalizes the H. So this is another thing that Brown and Katz have in common. Small thing, but worth noting. Anyway, let's get back to that email. Those of you who have some experience with academia might feel some doubts about the idea of that being written by a college professor. On the other hand, however, others could argue that maybe Katz rushed his email, hence why it reads that way. Or some might even propose that English is not Katz's first language, or at least that such a writing style might not be implausible for an academic who primarily moves within a Hebrew-speaking paradigm or environment. So we can just say that the form is another one of those curiosities. There's a lot of similarities between the way Brown writes and Richard Katz writes. But putting that, all before us and letting that sit in the backdrop, now I'd like to share what I consider the most significant piece of evidence. As I alluded to earlier, when Brown replied to both Bunis and the man who had written to Bunis mentioning Israelites, Brown also copied me. On your screen is that email from December 3rd. Notice the 3 dots at the top right corner of the email. As a feature on Gmail, if you click on those dots, you get a drop-down menu. And among the options in that menu is one which reads Show Original. When you click on that, you receive more data about the email. And this is the data for the email that William Brown sent me on December 3rd. Feel free to pause the video and look it over. Now, here's the email which Richard Katz sent me on December 16th, so 13 days later. Once again, I can click the 3 dots at the top right corner and get the drop-down menu and choose the option which reads Show Original. And here's the relevant data for the email which Katz sent me. Now, we can put the 2 results side by side for a comparison. First, note the SPF IPs are identical. Now, as this is part of a sender policy framework, the relevant IP address reflects that both messages were sent via Yahoo. It pertains to a Yahoo server, one of many Yahoo servers. However, it is highly unlikely that 2 people in different continents would wind up with the exact same IP across all 4 sets of numbers. I checked the SPF IP for various other emails I received from Yahoo accounts, and none of them matched like that. None of them were exact in the way these 2 are. I also sent an email to myself from a Yahoo account and found that my own SPF IP changes, for example, when I send it from my phone using my home Wi-Fi and when I alternatively send it using my mobile data instead. It's not impossible for these two people to have the same SPF IP, but as I said, it's highly unlikely. And moving on from that, notice that both Brown and Katz wrote from the same device, apparently a Samsung Galaxy using the Android 9 operating system. At this point, I'm sorry, but there are just too many coincidences. It seems clear to me that the best conclusion is that the emails from Katz were written by Brown himself. If the scholars were so firmly on their side, why would they need to badly misrepresent one scholar and then totally fabricate another scholar? Amazingly, in some of their subsequent panel discussions, they seem to almost give some insight into what might have motivated such a move. It strikes me as insight into the psychology behind this move. Consider these interesting clips.
It was crazy because when me and you were talking, I'm like, man, it's this other professor I'm going to email, and man, I'm hoping that by today, because me and you have been talking about the whole plan of the video, you was, getting ready to drop it and things like that. And I'm like, man, I pray that this guy, respond back.
So back on December 3rd, they were put in a position where at least one of them, William Brown, was hoping and praying for another scholar to come through where Bunis fell short.
And it was like, man, I think it was like maybe 3 or 4 hours. I think me and you talked together. I was like, yo, I just got an email. And then it was almost kind of like the things that we were talking about. Like, hey, we want to make sure that we get some, solid, no vague, gray, anything that they can't use. We don't want to try to. So I kind of pressed them. I think me and Beneo was texting too.
This time around, they didn't want to try to build a case off of something vague like they did with Bunis. Rather, they needed something more solid and definitive.
So I was like, listen, are you sure? Are you saying this? Is this what you're saying? Are you absolutely, just in case we have to pull those receipts or whatnot. And when he came back and said he's definitively saying that it's not Arabic, I was like, we don't even have to have the conversation about any type of social experiments or any type of language experimentations. That's just off the table, period. It's a definitive response.
Just as they were hoping Bunis could provide the definitive response which ends the debate, so too here, they wanted something definitive. However, this time, with this new scholar, they needed it to be far more substantive than what they got from Bunis. And especially fun and interesting is this next comment from Kelly Richardson.
What's cool here is when you see this portion of it, when he came back, he said here, thanks for these photos, William. I must say, looking at these photos, the old cursive handwriting of the Judeo-Spanish language seems quite clear. Also, there are other characters on the pews of cursive Hebrew used in Israel today. By the looking of the writings, the pews couldn't have been written by the same person. Remember when we was going through, I was like, man, he must have been eavesdropping on our conversations. Because remember I said that to you.
Now, I have no idea if Kelly Richardson knew Brown was writing the emails from Katz. And from that clip, I'm open to the possibility that Richardson did not know. What Katz wrote reflected their earlier private conversations to such a degree that Richardson himself had to joke that it was almost as if the author of those emails was privy to those conversations. Well, I'd say that in hindsight, one is tempted to say, yeah, the author of Katz's emails really did hear those private conversations that Richardson had with Brown. And the reason that Katz had access to those conversations, because Katz was one of the participants in that conversation. And now we close out the third and final section of this video on the appeal to scholars. In this section, we will look at a few other scholars, and I mean actual flesh and blood university professors, not mere figments of someone's imagination. Now, in my case, I just wanted to discuss the markings on the pews. I'm fine with others inviting scholars to weigh in and share what they feel appears on a given pew. However, with both scholar and student alike, I would want a person who claims to have found discernible language in a pew to point to the precise markings they have in mind and to transcribe what they feel appears therein. What I did not want is for someone to declare that a scholar said some language appears in there somewhere and now the matter is closed. As I've said in a previous video, a university professor is not a high priest who puts forth dogma that can never be questioned. That's simply not how academia works, and no scholar would say that once they speak, no student can ever ask questions or raise objections or investigate the matter for themselves. Again, that's not how academia works. Whatever the case, because a number of the supporters of Richardson and Brown kept asking me where my scholars are or which scholars I had reached out to, I decided that, if they insist, I can at least send out a few emails to a few different professors. And that's what I did. To each professor I wrote to, I sent 2 images. The first image I attached was of this particular pew from this angle. As you might have noticed, this is precisely the pew Kelly Richardson and I gave competing interpretations for, as I offered a hypothetical Arabic interpretation of the markings, and he offered a solitreo interpretation. This is covered in detail in my previous video. The second image which I attached to each email was this one, which is the same pew, just with some highlights added to guide the eyes, so to speak. Along with those images, I sent each professor the exact same email text, which read as follows, quote, "Forgive the intrusion of this email. In Savannah, Georgia, USA, there is a church, First African Baptist Church, which has pews which were built by slaves. On the outside of the pews which those slaves built are a number of markings. Some have claimed that the markings might be Hebrew, and others have claimed that the markings might be Arabic. Recently, someone has suggested that one pew might even have material from the Quran. But the person who made that suggestion is not any sort of expert in Quranic Arabic. I am writing to ask if you might offer some insight here. I have attached 2 images. The first image simply shows a pew unhighlighted. The second image shows the same pew with highlights as part of one person's attempt to elucidate what might be there. Nota bene, the portion on the right in the second image is in a different color because one person suggested that it might be the end of a different sentence. Could you tell me if, in your opinion, that looks to you or to any of your colleagues like it could be Hebrew, or if it looks like it could be Arabic, and if it might be the latter, if there is any possibility of it resembling anything in the Quran, and if you feel there might be any discernible language in the markings, whether Hebrew or Arabic or something else, are you or anyone you know able to suggest a possible translation? Apologies again for the intrusion. Thanks in advance for any help in this matter. Sincerely, AA." End quote. So, I received multiple replies, and the first email that I'd like to show is the reply I received from Samar Ali, professor of Arabic at the University of Michigan. His response reads as follows, quote, "Thanks for reaching out, and this is super interesting. It looks like Arabic in the West African script, and it could very well be a 3-word snippet of chapter 114 of the Quran, which nearly every Muslim would know and use for ritual prayer. I can't be certain without more context, but it looks like Al-Nas, Ilahil Nas, humanity, the God of humanity, from the middle of that chapter. The whole text of chapter 114 is very short. In the name of God, merciful to all, compassionate to each, I seek refuge with the Lord of humanity, the King of humanity, the God of humanity, who whispers in the hearts of humanity, of jinn and humanity. Besides prayer, it's used in stressful or frightening situations to summon God's protection. Let me know if I can be of any further help." End quote. So while this professor, Samar Ali, said he is not certain, he does say that it looks like it could be a West African rendering of a few words from the last chapter of the Quran, precisely the chapter I had appealed to when I proposed an Arabic reading for this pew. Also worthy of note, his point that this text was memorized and recited in particular by those in stressful or frightening situations could loan itself well to the idea of this being a text which certain slaves had memorized. Now let me show you another couple of emails, in particular one with a more definitive answer. This one is from Geoffrey Khan, who is the current Regius Professor of Hebrew at Cambridge in England. The Regius Professor, or Regis if you want, you can say Regis. The Regius Professorship of Hebrew at Cambridge is a Hebrew chair established by the King of England 480 years ago. So this is a serious Hebraist, and he also studies and teaches Arabic. So Professor Khan's initial reply to my email was as follows, quote, "Thank you very much for your message and for the photos of the pews in Savannah. The writing is Arabic and contains verses 2 and 3 from the final chapter or surah of the Quran. The text visible in the photo reads in Arabic, Sovereign of mankind, the God of mankind. When do you think this was written on the pews? Was it written by the slaves who built it? Best wishes, Joffrey, end quote. So I wrote back to Professor Khan with the following, quote, "Greetings, Professor Khan. Thank you very much for your reply. Regarding your question, I do not know for certain when the markings were made. The only thing I have is the church's oral tradition, which posits that the same slaves who made the pews were the ones who made those markings. Ergo, assuming that is correct, the markings would date to the 1850s. I really appreciate you sharing your conclusion regarding what appears in those markings. Forgive me if this question is somewhat redundant, but just to be clear, would you say it is definitely Arabic and not Hebrew? The context of my question is the alternate suggestions which have floated around, some positing that the markings should be Arabic and others positing that the markings should be Hebrew. Sincerely, AA," end quote. In response to that, Professor Khan wrote a second reply, which read in part as follows, quote, "The writing is clearly Arabic and is clearly from the Quran, the final surah, Surat al-Nas. It is certainly not Hebrew," end quote. Now, seeing how Richardson, Brown, and others treated the alleged positions of Bunis and Katz, can you imagine how they would react if Cambridge's Hebrew chair said that the markings are clearly Hebrew and certainly not Arabic? I think we can all agree that they would declare that the debate is finished and the matter is closed. So this begs the question, now that I have an email from Cambridge's Regius professor of Hebrew saying that the markings are clearly Arabic and certainly not Hebrew, should I play the same game? Should I say that the debate is closed and that mere students cannot say anything in response? Of course not. The reason why is because, as I said, that is not how academia works. No scholar would want me going around telling people that they cannot ask questions, or that they cannot raise objections, or that they cannot investigate the matter for themselves. This email does not have to end the discussion, and it especially should not be a tool, used to try to silence students of language. And, to drive this point home, let me share a third email. This one is from Mohsen Gudarzi, an assistant professor of Near Eastern Studies at the University of Minnesota. His email takes a different approach. His email reads in part as follows, quote, "Thank you for your email. I've looked at the images carefully, and I don't believe they contain Arabic writing. Now, it is not impossible for the markings to represent a highly cursive, idiosyncratic, and or local form of Arabic script. Someone with expertise in West African Islam could be a better judge of this. Nor is it impossible to read into them certain recognizable phrases from the Quran. I can read into them 2 phrases, in fact. But these would constitute imposition of a text upon the markings, which can be done basically with any set of sufficiently complex traces," end quote. Now, I imagine at this point, some might be thinking, wait, what? Why would you share that email? You should have ended it with the email from the professor at Cambridge. But I would prefer that we at least try to be somewhat intellectually honest. Moreover, I think Professor Gudarzi's email is helpful. There is a real possibility of an imaginative mind making connections based on familiar features and patterns while looking at something which is actually random or naturally occurring. And one can read up on, things like pareidolia and apophenia for more on this possibility. Finally, let's be honest. What sorts of replies we might get from certain professors can also be influenced by what precise images are shown, how those images are highlighted, and how the questions are worded. So there are multiple layers of interpretation and influence at play in these exercises. Try writing to different professors with this image, without any highlights, noting that some claim Hebrew appears on the pew and others claim Arabic appears on the pew, while also clearly saying up front that one other possibility is that these are just random or naturally occurring markings, like medullary rays or scratches, made at random. I think we all know that we're unlikely to get too many replies declaring that to clearly be Hebrew or Arabic if that approach is taken. On that note, I hope everyone enjoyed this discussion on the recent appeals to scholars, and I really am looking forward to the comments of others, and I'm looking forward to see where this discussion goes from here. On that note, God bless.
This right here. This, what's going on in our community, is disgraceful. Disgraceful and dishonorable. But this right here, ladies and gentlemen, is the worst of the worst. Never see anyone faking scholarship other than Hebrew Israelites. You wouldn't believe what these people did. They fake that they got information from a scholar and it's coming from the same IP address. These dudes are the worst. I have never seen this in my life. Family, this is so sad. It is so sad. I had to go live. What these Hebrews have done has made our culture look has made us look worse than what we are. They are frauds, literally frauds. You have never seen nothing like this in your life. Hebrew frauds. Just to try to win a dialogue and a debate, just to show you how dishonest these people are. Now, when you look at the IP address, look at the IP address, Dr. Mayat. Then look at the address where it says come from Richard Katz. That's the email they made up for the dude. The dude don't exist. They made him up to try to win a debate. Same IP address. The same person from the Boom Church, Will Brown. The same IP address is where it comes from, meaning it originated from you, Willie Brown. This is how sick these people are. Sick. You are gonna do this. This is the worst I've ever seen. And if the Hebrew community don't condemn this, sick of them. This is disgusting. Watch out, they're threatening to sue. Sue what? What are they gonna sue? Sue what? They literally made up a scholar. They are ridiculous. Let me go to Boom Church and see if I could find the community. Boom, is it the Boom Church in Atlanta? Is it that one? A Messianic Hebrew congregation, Pastor Morey William, Majors Brown. Yeah, that's him. That's him. Let me go to the community post. I told you, faithful to God, you better have facts together, Abu. In your recent video, you said that he was a professor at Tel Aviv. That's the first lie you told, and the rest of the lies you better law up because he'll handle the rest. We won't now. Now it's time to get them. It's gone. Okay, so they're saying, who is Richard Katz? They mad. They mad. The Hebrew language. Are you Richard Katz? I really saw a video about a professor who has analyzed some pictures of sincerely AA. It's them sending back stuff to themselves. That's what they're doing. They are wicked for what they're doing. Absolutely wicked. And people gonna be like, but Garfield, why are you surprised? Why are you surprised at what they're doing? It's not an issue of if I'm surprised or whatever. I'm just saying, do better. But they don't want to listen, man. These people don't want to listen. You have this guy claiming that these pews in Georgia are what do you call it? That they have Hebrew writings on them, right? So they found a scholar who agrees with them, allegedly. Come to find out that the guy who's a scholar has using the same IP address as the person who runs the Boom Church. Or are they lovers? They live in the same house? How you have the same IP address if he's in Israel? How is that possible? You are horrible. Would you believe that this Hebrew claimant out of Georgia from the Boom Church fakes an email from a scholar by the name of Richard Katz? Richard Katz coincidentally has the same IP address as the guy from the church. So you know what he did, right? He faked the email to try to say that the guy, Richard Katz, some so-called Jewish or white Hebrews linguistic scholar agrees that it's Hebrew on the pews. Yeah, hey, listen, man. Listen. This is sad. When I mean sad, this is really sad. It is impossible. If they're not the same person, there's no way they can have the same IP address. A dude in Israel is Abu. Stop it. These dudes are horrible. Horrible.
They got the same phone too, Samsung Galaxy.
What?
And they on Metro PCS. I just threw that in there.
And moving on from that.
Maybe Kelly Richardson don't know, but I'm alleged that he knew the whole time, man. Yo, these dudes, man. I don't know who these Hebrew dudes are, but I'm telling you, they are the funniest in the world. I'm telling you right now. There is no way, no how you as a human being is gonna allow yourself to say, hey, I'm gonna do this.
Like, man, after that, I'm doing bad.
I'm very sad. It's like that's like really depressing that black people doing this.
Garfield, who spends their time creating an email correspondence to try to make up some stuff? What point are they trying to prove?
They're trying to say that the pews in Georgia, the church, the African Baptist church, the pews are Hebrew. It's written in Hebrew. So the church says it's West African Arabic. That's what the church says on their website. I thought the debate was over right there. I'm going by what the church says. I got a headache even thinking about this, man. I'm about to sign off anyway, man. These dudes give me a headache.
I see, because you came on cussing and then you said to win an argument, they went this low, this deep to try to win an argument.
Man, this is worse than the time they said Hulk Hogan was an Israelite.
This one here. Whoa. Listen, man. Kelly Richardson, you co-signed it. So you just as guilty. The dude faked the emails, family. He should have never responded to Abu email. He set the bait, and it's like you set the trap for the mouse with the cheese, and you went and bit the cheese and got caught right in the rat trap. Right in the rat trap. And it's craziness. I'ma fake this. But these guys is running it shows how disingenuous their whole belief system is. And it shows how much, again, these people hate themselves. You're not happy with being an African American struggling under white supremacy. You're not. It has to be God not giving you blessings because of X, Y, and Z. It has to be. And it's sad. It is totally sad, yo. Y'all don't know how. Oh man, bro, I can't even believe they went through all of this just to try to convince people that their belief is real. It's sad, yo. It's sad. It's sad because you're pushing a lie. But he now comes out with a statement on his community thing, saying he's gonna sue them and all that sue talk. You ain't suing nothing. He got busted. And now he's like, oh, he's gonna sue and all this talk. Bro, I wouldn't even show my face for months, man. You fake as hell. Boom Church, you fake. I said it. Come sue me. You are fake for what you did. You are fake. You are phony. And I'm straight from Jamaica. I'm at my vacation, saw the video, watched it, and I'm telling you right now, you fake. Abu, great work.
Shout out to Abu, faithful to God, and Dagger Squad.
Faithful to God. I'm going to tell you, man, you need to be a part of Dagger Squad, faithful. I'm telling you, man. So, peace and love to everybody, man. One love. We love y'all. We love what y'all doing. If it's truth and it's information, I'm going to be right here. All right, but them Hebrew Israelites, I keep telling y'all, they the ones that make. I've never seen a black Christian do that. I've never seen a black Christian do that, 93. Never. Never did that. You'll never find a Christian making up fake emails to try to win a conversation. All right? Peace and love. I'm out of here. Never seen this. And let me say this about Vocab Malone. And by the way, let me say this about Vocab Malone, by the way. If Vocab Malone was a racist, I would have been paged him. I'd have been paged him. If I wouldn't have gotten him on the phone, I would have come and blast him on my channel.